Hi, Michael.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Carl Ramos, and I'm the operations manager here at the Leadership Coach Group. And I'll be your host for today's session. We're really excited to have you here for this month's open coaching webinar, and we have here the title The Stakeholder Management Skillset: Collaborate Better, Get Real Feedback, and Lead with Impact. But before we dive in, I'd love to make this interactive from the start. Like, go ahead and drop in the chat or in the where are you joining from, what kind of role you're currently in. So we're really interested to hear about our audience, and just let us know where you're coming in from, and we'll let you know. Let's see. So hi again. Once again, drop in the chat where you're calling in from, and always great to see where everyone's coming from, because we usually get people from all around the world. I am from Asia. I'm from the Philippines. Michael, where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from the Washington, D.C. area.
Yeah, so we have like 12 hours difference. So literally all around the world. Yeah. But yeah, quick question from everyone here in the chat. How many of you have ever felt like you're doing the work, but things still feel harder than they should because of people? Maybe it's getting alignment across teams, getting honest feedback, or navigating different expectations from your boss, peers. Now, that's exactly what today is about. Because leadership today isn't just about what you do, it's also about how effectively you work with people around you. So for those who are new, let me quickly share what this session is actually part of our leadership coach group LCG or LCG Open Coaching Series, which we host every first Friday of the month. And each session is designed to be practical, interactive, and grounded in real leadership challenges. And you get insights you can apply right away, a structured playbook which you can get right after this webinar. Later as well, you could participate if you want to for a live coaching segment where someone from the audience, someone from you guys, can bring in a real challenge and have Michael be share his expertise, his insights about your problem session. And to support you, we've created a stakeholder management playbook, which includes reflection prompts, practical frameworks, and tools you can actually use. So this isn't something you just listen to and forget. It's something you can continue working through. And what's great above all is it's free. So after this webinar, we will give you instructions about how you could get the copy. So tune in and see you. So just to give you a bit of context about us at with leaders across executive coaching or one-on-one coaching, team effectiveness, and leadership assessment. And here in the screen, as you can see, our coaches have worked with leaders across a wide range from different sizes, big or small, of all kinds of organizations and industries. So everything we're sharing today comes from real world leadership experiences, not theory. So now, without further ado, I would love to introduce our speaker for today, Michael Seelman. Oh wait, Michael is the CEO of Leadership Coach Group and an executive coach with over 20 years of experience helping leaders elevate performance, lead authentically, and create meaningful impact. And he has coached over 150 senior leaders across 5 continents, working with executives ranging from corporate leaders to government officials. Michael has also held senior leadership roles at the White House, the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, and the FBI, leading major initiatives in innovation, communications, and violence reduction across the US. He also served as a former FBI Deputy Chief Knowledge Officer and Global Head of Employee Communications, where he advised Director Bob Mueller following the 9/11 terrorist attack. And I just want to take a brief moment to acknowledge that Bob Mueller passed away a few weeks ago. And his leadership and legacy had a profound impact. And it's meaningful to recognize that connection and influence he had on leaders like Michael. Michael also holds a master's degree from Harvard University. There's leadership scholars, doctors James McGregor Burns and Ronald Heifetz. And he is also completing a PhD in organizational leadership, where his research explores how psychological safety supports successful AI integration. So, what I really appreciate about Michael is his ability to take complex leadership challenges and make them practical and actionable. And you will see how and why, or you will see him in action in this webinar. So, with that, Michael, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Carl, for that introduction. I appreciate it, and it's really proper that we recognize the impact Bob Mueller has had on our country. He is someone I emulate in terms of his integrity and service to the country. Was really fortunate to be able to serve with him. And speaking of introductions, I saw after you invited some folks that we heard some people talk about where they're calling in from. So we have Bridget calling in from Broomfield, Colorado. We have someone joining us from San Diego. We have Emily from North Carolina, and then many other folks. So welcome to all of you that are joining us today. Now I'd like to invite us all to get a little present in being really focused on what we have to share and learn today in this webinar. So as I often do with my coaching clients, I'm going to invite you to do a breathing exercise with us. For me, I like to try to sit up straight in my chair, put my feet on the floor flat and ground myself. I try to have a good posture. I don't always have. Try to concentrate on when we do this breathing exercise. So I invite you to do the exercise along with me so we can all become present in this conversation today about stakeholder management. So what we're going to do is something called box breathing, and I'll guide us through it, and we'll just do it for a few minutes here. First, what we want to do is take a deep breath in, hold it, and then do a long breath out. And then pause, do a deep breath in, hold it, deep breath out, pause, deep breath in, hold it, long exhale. Here you go. Now that's something you can do before a crucial meeting or a webinar like this to help us stay centered and really present with our audience. So I encourage you to use it anytime you have a critical meeting or critical event that you're about to launch into. Wanted to talk about our agenda today. We're going to cover three main topics. The first is exploring the ripple effects of our leadership. And that's a way to think about the different stakeholders that when we act, we affect maybe a broader audience than we might appreciate at first. And this includes future stakeholders and people beyond just our team. We also want to explore how to collaborate effectively with different stakeholder groups, whether our direct reports, our peers in cross-functional teams, or senior leaders. And the third topic that we want to cover today is how to get candid and meaningful feedback from these stakeholders. And some tools that we use include 360-degree assessments and customer satisfaction surveys. So we'll be exploring all of this in the next few minutes. First, we want to jump into seeing the ripple effects of our leadership so we can appreciate why it's so important. So we start with the drop into the pool of still water would be us. And it's the decisions we make, the actions we take, they have resonance just beyond ourselves or in the people immediately around us that we might immediately call to mind that are affecting, such as our team that we're leading. Well, they're going to be watching us. They might become the future leaders. They might take our position in the future. They might become other leaders in your organization. There's also other people that you might come in contact. They're looking to you as a leader. Well, how should I come about handling this? And so they might emulate what you do. Just we talked about how I looked to Bob Mueller and learned leadership from the way he acted internally at the FBI and tried to model after that behavior. Other people might be looking at you and your leadership. So that's an important starting point. Then we go out. What's the first ripple that we discussed is the impact your decisions might have on the team you're leading. It could affect the culture of that team or the climate, or it could affect the morale of that team. It can certainly affect the performance of that team. And in a more extreme, if you're treating your team members really well, they're going to come back to their families, to their homes, to the community and be happy. And then we have a greater impact. Something I think about, if I mistreat my team members, they might go back and they might yell at their kids. They might have a hard relationship with their spouse. So I like to think about not only how I might impact the team members, but their family. For instance, usually we'd have another team member on this call with us, but she wanted to experience the religious holidays today with her and her family. And so of course, do that. So you have to think about your decisions, how they affect not just your team members, but their family. So that might be the first ripple that you could think about. If you go out a little bit further from that, you can think of the broader organization, the company that you're in, the government agency or nonprofit you're in. What might be the impact there? Well, first, you can look at the cross-functional impact. So there might be a member of teams. The actions you do might affect how other teams perform. So that's something to think about. I might be trying to make a decision what's best for me and my team. we also think at what might be the impact of other teams in this organization. That's something I definitely kept in mind in the FBI. Sometimes Carl mentioned I'd be doing a knowledge management project. So, this would be great to help different leaders in the FBI and different experts share knowledge across the organization. But then I might say, oh, that could affect a different mission partner in a way that I hadn't thought of that might be negative for what they're trying to achieve. And there's some instances where that happened, and I had to be careful about that. You can also affect the reputation of your team, of your organization, and decisions you make. And that can be beyond just your team. It could affect different processes in your company. It could affect relationships with customers. So when you're making decisions, it's important to understand that outer ripple it might have too, beyond your team to the whole organization and its customers. Then, even thinking broadly than that, we can think about how might it affect future stakeholders. So one of the future stakeholders could be the person that's going to be sitting in your leadership seat in the future. If you hurt the reputation of your team, that might affect how people are going to be there later. You might decrease their authority or increase their authority. You might increase the resources they'll have or the reputation they have. It might affect the outer community. So to drive this home, let me bring to mind some examples. First, let's look at the ripple of organization to help you dive deeper into thinking about what that might be like. I like to think of it, let's say that we were in a hospital and I was a leader of that hospital. What might be the impact of decisions I make on others? So, for instance, if we operate on the wrong person, that's happened in hospitals before because there aren't good quality measures. Unfortunately, that's happened. If we operate on the wrong person or the wrong limb, then that might affect that person's life for the rest of their life. There's times when people have had the wrong limb amputated. It's times when they might have a surgery that's needed hasn't happened properly. So that certainly will affect that person. And then it could also affect their family. If they get disabled, there's going to be a family there that needs to be their caregivers for the rest of their life to support them. They might not be able to be as active with their children as a father or a mother, may not be able to be there at their games or play ball with them in the yard. So you can think about how you might affect that patient and that patient's family. That's that impact just beyond your team and your direct customer to family members. You might also affect the reputation of the hospital if they know that there's wrong surgeries have happened or patients have passed away. That might not be able to attract more people at a hospital. They might not get the care they need. If you're a local rural hospital, there might not be other options. It might hesitate to getting the health care they need. So you could have a great impact on that whole community in going to the hospital. So that's one way. If you were a hospital leader or administrator or a doctor, could have ripples way beyond your team and very deep impacts on people and their families. Another example I like to think of, I think about hospitals because my wife's a doctor and one of our coaches is a former hospital CEO. So that's brought that to mind. For the future stakeholders, what came to mind for me is at one point in my career, I worked in the Maryland State Department of Education, and I worked in the school performance program office where we rated schools and looked at their performance, kind of gave them a report card, if you will, on how well they do with their students and their learning and their attendance and their going on to test scores and on to college and things like that. So it makes me think about a school principal. A school principal can have effect on their staff, right? That's your team. It can have effect on their morale, on how you rally the students. You could create a safe learning environment for your team and for the students at that school, or perhaps you're creating an unsafe learning environment. I've been at some schools. I went to some of the lowest performing schools in the state of Maryland, and sometimes there's some unsafe environments where students have to go to school. Certainly when I worked some of those violent cities in the country, I went to some pretty dangerous cities like Detroit, and there's some kids there that have to walk through some pretty dangerous neighborhoods to get there to schools that might not be that safe. And so if you're a principal not making wise decisions, you could affect the safety of your staff, your teachers, your administrative staff. You could affect the safety of your students. You could not make investments in the right security technologies or hiring security personnel that can secure that school. And so that can have a great impact on them. You also can affect, if you and your teachers are doing the right thing, you can have a ripple effect of these students on what they'll do in future life, the trajectory of their life, whether they'll become citizens that contribute a lot to society or ones that have a lot of missed potential that don't contribute as much as they could to society, or perhaps even detract from society because they have few options and might turn to a life of crime. So as a high school principal, you can have a lot of impact. And you might think, well, that's a great immediate impact I have on my students and my staff and faculty. It also can be a future impact. I mentioned the school performance program. Well, we gave those report cards to schools, and we would get parents calling in to our office saying, what's the score of this school? What's the score of that school? And we also later published that information online, and parents would look at that data before they would decide to move to that community or not. So you could have an effect on whether a community is growing and people are moving in there, or whether they're leaving that community because the quality of the school isn't there for their children. So that's a great resonance you can have, not just in your present staff and students, but also in the future of your community. So I use those examples to talk about how real this ripple is. And that's something we should keep in mind when we make these decisions, is how it will affect these groups of stakeholders at this current time and in the future. Next, I want to talk about collaborating effectively with key stakeholders. So let's dive into that a little bit more. One of the key stakeholder groups I like to start with is our direct reports. And with our direct reports, a key factor in their ability to perform is psychological safety. Now, not everyone that's joining us today might be familiar with that term, so let me define that. Psychological safety is the belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. So if we have people that feel comfortable pointing out mistakes, asking questions, suggesting innovations, our team is going to be very good at learning. And teams that are very good at learning are also going to be very good at performing, particularly in environments that are changing. And we know that in this day and age, there's a lot of volatility, a lot of change in the environments we're leading, whether it's because of AI or disruptions in global supply chains, like oil right now, or during the pandemic in manufacturing. There's a lot of things that we need to do to adapt. And so that psychological safety is what's going to enable us and our teams to learn and adapt and then perform really well in those changing environments. So how you increase the psychological safety of your direct reports as a key stakeholder group is really important. So let's talk about that. One of the key things we can do as leaders is to establish a human connection with our team members so they feel genuinely seen and valued and cared for as individuals, not just for their performance, but as people. So as Carl could tell you, when we start our team meetings, the leadership coach group, we say, how was your weekend? What did you do over the weekend? How are things with your loved ones? We check in about that. So we make sure we have a human connection. When I do broader leadership coach group meetings, we start with what we call a check-in question. We say, we have something to try to foster community so we get to know each other, one another better, so we can know to trust and rely on one another and see each other as human beings. So we purposefully cultivate that human connection. That's not something I always appreciated as much as I do now. When I was a younger leader, I didn't focus on that as much as I thought I should now. I was more focused on tasks, and I felt like I had so many tasks, I would skip over this step. But this is a critically important thing to do. For those of you who might have been inclined, like the earlier version of myself, don't skip over that. That can really have an impact on your team members, giving their discretionary effort and feeling connected to you and what your organization does. The other key factor is inclusion. Team members should feel invited to participate and that they can share their ideas or concerns will be heard and understood and valued. And you can invite that so that you do have this open dialogue, not just directly to you as a leader, but this third area, the third box, is you want them to talk with each other in that open dialogue so that they'll share ideas with each other. And even though there might be horizontal, they're sharing ideas and supporting one another. And ideally, you can get to the point where they can challenge each other respectfully. Say, you know what? I think that your department can do even better there. And maybe my department can help you with that. But you can have that kind of respectful challenge of the status quo. Say, we can do better as a team and let me help you. And when you have these other factors, that leads to more learning. And as a team leader or a leader in general, you can support that learning, that if there's mistakes that do happen, you can say, okay, what did we learn from that? How can we do better next time? How we build that into our culture as a leadership coach group is after every team meeting, we do what we call a plus delta, which is something I learned when I worked in the White House Reinventing Government office. Plus is, what is something we liked about this meeting that we can continue to do? And delta is, what should we change in the future? And then we have the next meeting where you report, this is what the delta was last time. Let's make sure to change that in this meeting. That's how you have that culture of learning. And that's something as the Deputy Chief Knowledge Officer at the FBI that I encouraged a lot throughout our processes and our different parts of the FBI. So now we've covered how to increase psychological safety and collaborate effectively with direct reports. Let's move on to the next area, is collaborating with peers and cross-functional teams. So peers are expecting something different out of us than our direct reports, right? Our direct reports are looking to us for direction, protection, and order. They might be looking at us career development and guidance and human connection. What we're looking for, key for our peers, is to be proactive and anticipate the needs for being asked. If I'm the head of HR and my peer is the chief financial officer, my team should be reaching out to the CFO's team to say, what are your future job needs? When can I post? How can I make it faster so you can fill your vacancies? How can I make sure your people have the right benefits? What can I do in HR to reduce our costs, which is something you're thinking about a lot as the CFO. So we want to be proactive in anticipating the needs of our peers. We want to try to develop a trusting relationship with them. We trust that they're going to help us with what we need, and they can trust us to support them in their mission set, even if it's different than our mission set, because we understand that each of us contributes to the overall mission, what we're trying to accomplish as a company, as an agency, as a nonprofit. We have to have that mutual trust because we're all trying to achieve the same outcomes. At the FBI, we were trying to protect the United States from terrorist attacks, from criminal acts, and preserve civil liberties. And we made sure that every part of the FBI knew that those were the outcomes we were trying to achieve. We also want to have a positive mentality and approach the challenges that we have and our peers have with optimism and constructive energy. Not that, oh, my team's already so overwhelmed, how can you ask anything else of me? That's not a positive mentality. When I think about, well, maybe I can help my colleagues more. What can I do? What can my team do to help them and make their life easier, their part of the mission easier? We want to be positive. And working together, we can make it happen. And maybe it would even take less resources if I collaborate. So we want to approach things with that positive mentality. We want to focus on results over credit, not saying, gosh, is this going to make me look better? Is this going to lead to my promotion faster? That'll come if you're a good leader. But we want to focus on collective wins. How do we get to those win-win situations with our peers and our cross-functional teams, not just individual recognition? And it might take us being vulnerable, admit we don't know or that we need help. And that authenticity is what's going to help us build trust. So a key insight here is it takes trust and support of colleagues to earn that trust. So we have to first focus outwards and helping others and hope that and expect that they'll reciprocate, trust that they will. Now, earlier we talked about psychological safety for direct reports. that also applies for cross-functional teams, where we or team members are serving with other departments, trying to tackle a problem that requires multiple departments to solve. Those are some of the toughest challenges I found they usually require multiple departments responding, something I saw in the FBI. And when you have lawyers with accountants, with IT professionals, with in our case, FBI agents, when you have that cross section, it can be harder to achieve psychological safety where people are challenging and working collaboratively together and learning. So you might have to lean in more to that to establish that psychological safety because they're not as used to working together. For IT specialists talking to other IT specialists, that's a comfortable environment for us. If one lawyer talking to another lawyer, to our general counsel, that's generally a comfortable environment for us. But being on a team that includes lawyers and IT specialists and FBI agents, it might be harder to establish that feeling of trust and comfort that leads to high psychological safety. So we have to work at that a little bit more to build that trust and collaboration. So just something to expect with cross-functional teams. Now, another key stakeholder group is senior leaders. And the way we collaborate with senior leaders is different than the other groups that we talked about. We talked about our direct reports. We talked about our peers and cross-functional teams. Now we're talking about those that might be above us in the org chart of hierarchy. So how do we approach those leaders? The first thing is we could call it mapping out influence and building a coalition. So we understand for when we're trying to achieve something, either for just our department or cross-functional team, who are the key senior leaders that can enable us to accomplish that mission set we're trying to accomplish? Who has the resources? Who controls the budget? Who might help us get people? Who might help get access or different understanding? Who should we reach out to in the senior leadership that can help us with those things? And so we want to map out the people that have the influence to help us leverage the outcomes we're trying to get to. So once we identify those people in the organization, the senior leaders we should focus on, we then think about them one-on-one and understand what matters to them. Not what matters to us, what matters to them, and how might we connect with what matters to them. So we might say, what do they care about? What are their priorities? What pressures are they facing? How are they held accountable? What are their success metrics? And we want to, when we approach them, we try to make a connection with what we're going for with what they're trying to achieve. And then they'll be more inclined to support us, to partner with us, to use their resources on our behalf. And then if you go to this bottom left corner, when we're messaging to them, we want to lead with the problem we're trying to achieve, not necessarily a prescribed solution. We want to say something they already care about. Okay, I understand you're worried about declining revenue. If there's a CEO or a head of sales, or if you're head of HR, I understand there's a lot of churn and turnover, and try to connect with how what you're doing might support what they're doing. Stephen Covey calls seek first to understand before trying to be understood. So we demonstrate that we understand some of the challenges they're facing when we first message with them, and we try to connect with that. And then we might propose ways they could help. And then we might ask for their authorization to experiment, to try new things. When I worked in the White House Reinventing Government office, we had to encourage people to try new things. We had to protect them to try new things. We had to get their senior leaders to buy in so that people could try new approaches to doing the same types of outcomes at less cost for the government in a more effective way. So we have to get that permission to experiment, to take calculated risks. You might need to explain to these senior leaders what the risks are so they can make an informed decision, and that you're trying to do this to have a better outcome to serve the customers or the mission set. So that permission to experiment from senior leaders could be very important in a way you get that, not just resources, but permission to try things in a new way. So that's some key aspects of collaborating with senior leaders. Next, an important part of collaborating effectively with stakeholders is getting feedback from them, from these different stakeholder groups we mentioned, to know, are we collaborating well with them? Or are there things that we could do better? So there's different ways we might do that. depending on the type of feedback and who we're reaching out to. Let's start with why is that important? Why is this important? Well, when we get that feedback, it can help reveal to us blind spots, both our own blind spots as a leader and perhaps how our team is performing and supporting other team. We might know our intent is to support this cross-functional team or to be a good collaborative partner with our peer, but we might not know if they're seeing it that way. This type of feedback also helps us reduce bias in our decisions and how we are receiving feedback. If we have numerical data about how we're being received, how we're serving our customers, it's hard to misinterpret that, right? Instead of just assuming, hey, if my peer smiles at me, my department's doing a good job with them. Now let's solicit that feedback directly so we don't have some bias in the way we're perceiving things. And this builds some self-awareness for us as leaders so we can be more effective in the future. And when Carl and I were talking about this slide, we said these next 3 bullets of why it's important, they only happen if we act on the feedback. Now, we could solicit feedback. We could ask for this feedback. We could get great surveys. We could have great data coming on, but we could reject it and say, oh, it must be faulty. I don't care. I've got too much to focus on. Well, if we do that, we're not going to get these next 3 benefits. But if we see that data and say, oh, gosh, my team's not perfect, I'm not perfect, there's things I can do to change, we can do to change to be better colleagues, be better leaders, then we'll get these other benefits. The first one is we'll be more effective as leaders. If we get the feedback and we make changes based on what our stakeholders are telling us, we'll have a greater impact, a greater positive impact on the mission and how our colleagues can carry out the mission. It'll improve our team performance. It'll help us be more aligned with what the organization overall is trying to do and what our peers are trying to do. And it'll also help us be a learning organization. We'll have that cycle of getting feedback, analyzing and acting on feedback, getting feedback, analyzing and acting on feedback. That'll drive continuous growth and development for us as individuals and our team as an effective unit. And as we talked about that ripple effect, our people also be watching us, so they'll see, oh, that's what a leader's supposed to do. They're supposed to solicit that feedback. They're supposed to act on it. They're not supposed to be defensive. Hopefully, we're role modeling that for our team. So one type of feedback mechanism that we use a lot in the leadership coach group for our clients is 360-degree assessments. Let me mention, because you're not familiar with that, I know we've got some HR people on, I'm sure very familiar with this, but for those of you that are joining us that might not be, 360-degree assessment gets from where we're getting feedback on. We want to first, at least for a survey-based assessment, we want to get feedback on ourselves. We want to reflect on how do we think we're doing as leaders. So that would be a self-assessment. And we compare that with how others perceive how we're doing. And the first stakeholder group we want to get feedback from is our direct reports. So that's starting the circle with our direct reports. How do they see us doing as leaders? And it's sometimes hard to get candid feedback from your direct reports. I know I had to ask multiple times at the FBI of my employees to get that feedback. Sometimes they had to see, is Michael serious about feedback? Is he going to get upset if I give him feedback? So I'd ask, and then they would say something pretty innocuous. Michael, one of my employees said, when you approach my cubicle, sometimes you're coming from behind me and it startles me. Can you come from the side? So they started with easy feedback for me to hear, and then it got to harder feedback of things that I might want to do. But I had to keep asking them before they gave me that harder feedback. And so you might need to do the same thing with your direct reports, or you can come to a group like the Leadership Coach Group, and we can help solicit that feedback from your direct reports, either through surveys or through interviews by your coach. The second stakeholder group that we want to get feedback is from our peers or our colleagues. It might be easier for them to speak truth to power because they're peers of ours. They have the same level of power approximately as we do in the organization. So they might give you feedback if you ask them. So you could probably do that on your own. And or you could, again, have a group like the Leadership Coach Group help that for you. So we've talked about direct reports. Now we're talking horizontally about our peers. And closing out the 360 is above us is our manager and senior leaders. We ask them, how's the feedback? Ask the boss. Don't just wait for performance appraisal time. How am I doing? How am I doing from your perspective? What can I do better? Ask for that type of feedback. Have you seen me changing based on your feedback? And again, you could do that yourself or ask us to help you with it. And then you can ask other people in the organization, what's my brand in this company? They see me as a flexible leader that's good at communicating with someone at their seniority level in the organization, or there's someone that doesn't understand what's important to them, can't speak in short headlines and then be open to questions. Do I give too much detail when I speak with them? Is my brand that I'm too hard to work with, right? It's good to understand that. So that's kind of above us in the authorizing environment. So to summarize, what this type of process requires of us is courage, the courage to ask, right? Sometimes it seems easier not to ask and just assume we're perfect or great as a leader. Well, let's find out. Let's have some courage and find out. Some humility, because we're going to find out we're not perfect. I've never done a 360. I've had the privilege of working with some awesome leaders, but I've never had them get a perfect score on their 360s. Not a single leader, right? So it's humility. We find out we're not perfect, and it's humbling. I know some of my early 360s, the FBI, were a bit humbling to get the results because I knew I wanted to be a great leader, and I was supposed to train other leaders. So, and yet I wasn't being perfect, and I needed to work on that. And then the discipline comes in acting on that feedback. So you hear something from an employee, from a peer, you can research it and say, yeah, I agree with you. I'm going to act on that feedback. Here's what I've done about it. Or sometimes you might disagree with the solution they propose and say, I don't think we can act on it the way you suggested. Let's think of a different way we can address that gap you're seeing. But it's good to close that loop and have the discipline to follow up. That's what's expected of us as leaders: courage, humility, and discipline. From our stakeholder groups, for them to be able to give us valuable feedback that's candid and specific, those people need to feel a sense of safety, particularly our direct reports. To give candid feedback, they need to feel safe that they won't be punished or won't get defensive, or there might be negative consequences if they give you feedback. Maybe even a peer would be worried about that. Well, maybe Michael's not the best person to collaborate with, but if I tell him how he could be better, he might become the worst person to collaborate with because he'll get defensive, right? It could be someone thinks that way. So we have to make sure they feel safe giving us feedback that we need to hear. The other thing they need is to be encouraged to be very specific, so we know what direction to head to in the future. So not just what's been bad in the past, but what should this leader do differently in the future? We need to ask our stakeholders to give us that kind of guidance. What should be different in the future? And the intention they should bring to it is to help us grow. Not to make us feel bad, not to put us down, not to dwell on the past, but they should come to the 360 with the intent to help us grow, in the belief that we'll act on the feedback. That's what we want them to have, is come with that intention, and that they should make specific suggestions about what we could do differently in the future that would fill the gap that they see. So that's what makes the feedback the best, is if the stakeholders we're talking with feel safe to give us candid feedback, they know what kind of feedback that help us in the future, and is specific enough and with the right intent to help us grow and get better. Those are the features that we're looking from ourselves in 360s and from our stakeholders. So we talked about 360s are a great way for you as a leader to get feedback. And I know we have a lot of HR people joining us today. So you might encourage your leaders to do this. And a way of doing that is to say, hey, maybe the first time you get 360 data just comes to you, and I don't have to see it. Your boss doesn't have to see it. So you get them down that journey if they're not doing 360s right now in your organization. That's the way to encourage your leaders to do it. Another important measure of how we're doing with our stakeholders is to do customer satisfaction surveys. So we can think of customers as both internal customers and external customers. Let's talk about HR leaders. Your internal customers as HR leaders might be employees and your peers that lead departments in your organization. So you could ask them, are we delivering on commitments and timelines? Perhaps you make a service level agreement that if Carl was a department head with me and I'm the head of HR, I might say to Carl, I'm going to make an agreement that when you have a vacancy and let me know of a vacancy, I'm going to post that vacancy within 5 days of when you let me know about the vacancy and give me your requirements. I'm going to close it and give you candidates within 60 days that you can interview, and then we'll bring them on board within 180 days or less. Maybe whatever it might make sense for your organization. At the FBI, we had to do background investigations, security clearances, so we took a little longer for us to onboard. Perhaps in your organization can do it even faster. So that might be what we're talking about: commitments and timelines to a service level agreement with a peer. And then you might ask, am I achieving those commitments and timelines? Is my communication for my department clear and proactive? I knew when I was the chief of internal communications, our head of HR and training would come to my team a lot to help make sure their communications were clear and proactive. We discussed how to do that, and my team members, my communications advisors, would help those assistant directors of the FBI with their communication to make sure it's clear and proactive. And then you might ask, are our processes easy to use? I know that when I wanted a new IT system as leader of the FBI, there's forms that I had to fill out, and sometimes I found them easy to do. Sometimes I found them hard to fill out. I didn't really know how to answer the question because it might be in IT speak, and some of my other peers knew even less. So is the process to access your team's resources, how easy is that to use? How understandable is it? And are we making it easier for you to accomplish your part of the mission? That's something else you could talk about in your survey. For external customers, you can talk about, does a product meet your service or needs? What pain points remain unresolved? How they perceive responsiveness and reliability? And would they recommend us to others or not? That's called like a net promoter score. So that's things you could ask your external customers, external to your company. So let's get to the key takeaways here. One of the things I want to mention is leadership happens through relationships. And these relationships are with our stakeholders. And we talked about those different stakeholder groups: our direct reports, our peers and cross-functional teams, our manager, people, senior leaders, and people external to our organization, our communities, our customers. We want to expand our lens, think about current and future stakeholders and how our decisions might impact them. We want to tailor our approach to each stakeholder group. We talked about approaching and collaborating with stakeholder groups differently depending on what they expect of us and where they sit in the organization. We want to make sure our feedback that we receive is valuable and candid, and that we act on it. We also want to influence in a way that's aligned with others and not necessarily just brute force authority. We're going to try to come into alignment because we know that that's important to do. So those are some of the key takeaways from what we discussed so far. Over to you, Carl.
All right. So now we're moving into one of the most valuable parts of this session, our live open coaching. But before that, I want to thank you, Michael. That was such a great discussion. Really, I learned a lot of new things, even if we went through the slides previously. But I hope everyone here, whoever you are watching, you enjoy this. In this session, this is where everything we've talked about comes to life. So we're looking for someone who's open to bringing a real stakeholder challenge, something or better understand. So if that's you, you could go ahead and type "I volunteer" in the chat or in the comments below. And just to set expectations, we're looking for someone who are open to having a meaningful coaching conversation. If you want, you could also will turn on your camera and a microphone, and you're comfortable share. But yeah, if you have any questions, doesn't have to be perfect or big problem. You could just share it.
Thank you so much, Carl. I just want to echo what Carl is saying. We invite you to volunteer. I know we had Emily in North Carolina, we had Bridget in Colorado, we have some other, many other anonymous people joining us. Some
Yeah.
welcome from Michigan. So if you have something that you'd like some coaching on, feel free to type it in the chat, the question you have. Maybe you don't even have to come on camera if that you're shy, camera shy. We'd love to hear something you might
Yeah.
want us to provide more feedback on.
Yeah, if you have any question at all, you could just type in the chat, and then Michael will talk about it mostly. But so it can be uncertainty around how you want to approach or collaborate with someone. So if it's something that's been in your mind, this is a great opportunity, really. But yeah, from now, we don't since we don't have anyone yet. I actually wanted to talk about something from your past, Michael. You mentioned a lot of stories from, when you were working with the FBI. Do you want to share more about that experience?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Let me go back to our key take. This might be a way to tell a story that epitomizes these key takeaways. What comes to mind is when I was the chief of internal communications at the FBI, I was the first person to hold that position in the FBI. It didn't exist before. And so I was very conscious that the things that I was doing were setting a new precedent. And so I that affected the way that I led. And I thought about that ripple effect. And I thought about, could I try to make a power grab for other resources, because there were local departments of internal communications and I was the global chief of internal communications. Did I want to try to subsume those resources, or did I want to work in partnership? So I decided to work in partnership with them and be aligned. And so what I did is had a I went to lunch. I took each of those local department heads to lunch, and I asked them, with this new role I have, how could I help you? What would you like to see out of this global chief of internal communication, this team that I had formed in behalf of the director? And so we had those conversations over lunch, and really not threatening. I took them out, say, how can I help you? What would you like this to look like? How can we create this together? So I was very cognizant of leadership happens through relationships. My boss at the time, she called it my lunch offensive. I went out and had lunch with all these folks, and then I thought about expanding the lens. I knew what we did globally would affect these other departments, so I thought about that. I tried to tailor my approach to each stakeholder group. They were peers of mine, at least in terms of FBI rank, even though I was the global chief. So I treated them as peers, and I also tried to recruit a senior leader of the FBI, the number 3 person at the FBI, to be the sponsor of our initiative. So when I approached him, I did those steps that I mentioned about what's important to him. Uh, how should I ask him? Was clear about what my ask was, and what I was trying to accomplish. And he signed on. And then I just asked him, I was like, hey, can you send out this email? I wrote it for him, so make it easy for him, to show that the number 3 guy at the FBI was behind this initiative, and asked him to come to the meeting so that people would show up. And it was, my ask of him was really clear. I gave him some talking points that helped him, and he was very happy to support me and believed in the importance of what we were trying to achieve. It was one of the top 12 initiatives of the FBI at that time, was to improve internal communications. So he was happy to be aligned with it, and I made it easy for him to do it. And then we asked for feedback. Like we worked on town halls with Director Mueller when he was the FBI director. and we send out surveys to employees, say, what do you think of this town hall? Do you understand where the FBI is headed? How do you feel about the future of the FBI? And we didn't just collect that data, but we analyzed it and we shared it with Director Mueller and said, okay, this is what we got. Maybe we can use it in the future. And then we knew that if we were aligned and we supported what these local were doing, then we'd be more effective as a team. So that's something I kept in mind. And I see now we have a comment from
Yeah.
one of the team members, so one of the colleagues that we have on with us. So Bridget, do you want to read that to me, Carl?
Yeah. Thank you, Michael, for sharing your experience from the FBI. So we have like a comment here from Bridget. I'm in a situation of interviewing for smaller companies and I want to know how best to get them to value R when they didn't have it before. What?
So it's kind of similar to the story I mentioned, Bridget. If you're interviewing for head of HR roles for smaller companies, you're kind of like the story that I told. You're like the chief of HR and you have smaller companies. So ways you might do that is reach out to them in a collegial way and say, I'm the corporate head of HR, but I want to help you in these companies. That's where the work's being done. And so you could work with those partners to what do they want out of the head of HR when you're interviewing them. And so it's aligned with what the heads of those smaller companies need. And to build relationships, you could, when they come on board, you could say, how can I help you? What are some of the challenges? I'm here to support you. Maybe you can help them get to know each other. Maybe the head of HR for one company could get to know the head of HR for another company, and you could be that broker to help them get to know one another. Maybe bring them together for a meal or a retreat. Even though they're in different companies, they might be able to support one another, and to get them to value HR when they haven't before. Maybe those other company leaders, you can say, this is a best practice of HR, is that they're your business partner, that they can help you. Maybe you can put into place some service level agreements. Maybe that level of service wasn't there before, so they can recognize that value and trust that it'll be there for them. Is that helpful to you, Bridget? Feel free to put something in the comments.
Yeah, that's a very good tip, Michael. I think that's very helpful, even if it, for me in the future, maybe. And for the question as well, if you have more questions, you could just also still comment, but I think we don't have much time now. So maybe call with Michael. So after this session, get a free complimentary coaching session and you could access it using this link, and I'll show it in the screen there. So it's pretty long, but we would also be posting it in our social media channels. So tune in if you want to get more. And of course, we welcome your feedback. So you'll see a QR code here. If you can take a minute to scan it and share your thoughts, that really helps us continue improving these sessions. We actually review your feedback and it directly shapes how we design future topics, formats, and experiences for you. So your input really does make a difference. And finally, we'd love to have you join us again next month for our next open coaching session, which will be Clarity Under Pressure, the executive discipline of leading through tension. So if today was valuable, so again,
So let me just piggyback on what Carl's been sharing, that we're here for you. You can contact this way. I hope that you'll be able to reach out and take advantage of that complimentary session. What we're also offering is those that do schedule with me, we'll give you a free 360-degree assessment. So the first 5 people that schedule with me, it could be for yourself, it could be a different leader in your company, it could be for a friend. But if you schedule with me and you're interested in getting a 360-degree assessment, we'd be happy to provide you that assessment and a debrief. That's a multi-thousand-dollar value right there. So I encourage you to reach out to us. You can go to our leadershipcoachgroup.com website, and you can go to then our learning tab and go to our free webinars, and you'll see this open coaching, or you can go to the link that we have at the bottom of the screen. You sign up for that complimentary coaching session with me, and you'll be able to have that free 360 and debrief. We offer it to you. We just encourage you to really act on what we said. Take advantage of that, the stakeholders. Ask them for feedback. And we want to be part of that process for you. That's why we're offering those complimentary 360s and debriefs. Thank you so much for having me today and joining us. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank Carl for organizing this for us. Thank you all for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful weekend. Take care.
You. Take care. Bye.